My name is Barbara Klein, and I am an archival processing assistant at the Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. This fall will be my one-year anniversary after a long career previously in presidential libraries. I felt it appropriate to share the story of Hope Williams Sykes, a woman from early 20th century Fort Collins history. Not only were we both born in Kansas, but we share a birthday. Hope Sykes had to be my topic. Iris Hope Williams was born on November 2, 1901, in Sherman County, Kansas, in a dugout near Colorado, close to the Colorado border. Her father, a farmer, acted as midwife during her birth. She was the firstborn of John Nelson and Ari Ann Williams, with two younger brothers, Alan Renwick and Robert Everett. Her early life in rural Kansas influenced her views on the lives of farm workers in the Midwest. Times were hard in those days, but from them came my understanding of the land and the very real problem of the farmer's battle with the elements. As a teenager, Hope's family moved to Colorado. She attended Colorado Agricultural College in Fort Collins. Hope also taught elementary school at a two-story brick schoolhouse, Plummer School, at the intersection of East Vine Street and Summit View Drive, what is now Timberline. The school was located near the sugar beet factories and fields, and the German Russians who worked in both. Hope's teaching salary for 1923 to 1925 was $1,125 per year. She became acquainted with the families and often visited their homes to help students with their studies. As an aside, the school still stands at this location. Since closing as a school in 1960, the building has been an antique store, publishing store, residence, art gallery, and event center. After her second year of teaching at Plummer School, Hope married Howard Sykes. Howard built a combination service station and home for the couple across the street from Plummer School. The couple were not able to have children, and Hope wanted to adopt, but Howard was not willing. The Sykes marriage on May 31, 1925 in Fort Collins was recorded in Arapahoe County, Colorado. They were married at ages 24 and 23, respectively. 5 years later, the 1930 U.S. Census listed Howard W., age 29, and Hope W., age 28, Sykes living in house number 82 that was owned by Howard. The census shows that Howard and his parents were from Illinois, Hope was from Kansas, and her parents were from Missouri and Indiana. Howard's occupation is listed as service station owner, while Hope's was recorded as none. In the house that doubled as a service station, Howard Sykes sold gasoline, automotive supplies, and penny candy for the neighborhood children. It is in this house where Hope Sykes began to write about the Germans from Russia who worked the sugar beet fields. Neighbors said that she sat behind a screen that separated the living quarters from the service station and took notes about the speech patterns and stories told. Before she even completed her first book, Hope won 2 Bon Fils Awards from the Denver Post for her stories including Colorado's White Gold, about the sugar beet industry in Colorado and its influence on the economy. The Bread Loaf Writers Conference in Vermont gave her a fellowship where she became acquainted with important literary critics and writers on the national stage. Hope's first book, Second Hoeing, was about the plight of German-Russian immigrants. In a letter to a Colorado women's club, Hope wrote about the painstaking task of writing this book. I wrote Second Hoeing completely, 3 different times during a 5-year period. I kept notes for 2 years on the conversations of the German-Russians, jotting down tricks of speech here at the service station. I spent a year keeping notes on all the work that was done in the beet field, which joins our small half-acre of ground. I kept notes on all the activity of the beet dump from early morning until night. For 7 years, I just absorbed the feeling and the undercurrent of the beet industry and these people. Second Hoeing went on sale May 13, 1935. 3 Denver stores carried the book. One store sold out and had to borrow books from one of the other 2. This image is the cover of the first printing. The term second hoeing is not familiar to most people today, but when Hope Sykes wrote the book in 1935, most everyone could tell you that the term referred to the process in growing sugar beets when a second pass was made to be sure that extra weeds were removed to ensure that the beet plants were 12 inches apart. Using her first-hand observations of the German Russians in her community, Second Hoeing was a fictional story about a young 16-year-old girl named Hannah Schreismiller, who was about to be confirmed in church at the end of 8th grade. Hannah and her classmates are needed to help their families in the sugar beet fields, and that work causes the children to miss a great deal of school and become behind in their studies. Hannah's father, Adam, is harsh, almost tyrannical. He works his family in the beet fields while expecting the children to finish 8th grade and help in the house. Her mother is a sweet woman who loved caring for her several children and her home. She was a field worker as well as the glue and the nurturing spirit of the family. The book follows this family through hard and tragic times, and after the death of her mother, Hannah takes on the role of caring for the Schreismiller family, while her own hopes and dreams of furthering her education and starting a family are dashed. Critics of the book felt that the English spoken by the Schreismiller family, the parents in particular, was too awkward and hard to understand. At numerous times in the book, dramatic Adam Schreismiller uses the phrase, Gott im Himmel, God in heaven. When Hannah tells her father she's going with a boy to a dance, her father responds, "You don't go mit him. Worth nothing like one nematode beet he is. Bah! Got out, so we have some peace mit ourselves once it." These are examples of the stilted phrasing of the English language by Hannah's parents, but because of their schooling, the children use more proper grammar. Hope Sykes' description of the Germans from Russia in the book was not received well by the local German-Russian community. The depiction in the book of dishonesty in the community, the inhumane working conditions of the children, as well as a stereotype of dirty Russians, created an animosity against Hope and her husband Howard. Most of their customers were German Russians, and they began to, in effect, boycott Howard's gas station and shun the couple. Neighbors said that they were nearly bankrupt when they moved into Fort Collins. Hope waxed philosophical about the similarities in beets and life. Through the rows of wilted beet plants, Hannah walked, hoeing out the weed and extra beets, which had been missed in the first thinning. This was swifter work and not so tiring as the blocking and hand thinning. But the sun was hotter, the air more sultry and dry. All this work, Hannah thought, in order that just one beet, the strongest and largest, might be left to grow and flourish. One beet, separated by 12 inches on each side from its neighbors. Every thought, every effort was put forth so that this one select plant should attain its greatest promise. All the plowing, the rolling, the preparation in the cold spring so that the ground would be as finely pulverized as machinery and human planning could make it. All the firming of the soil to the right degree of compactness, all the seeds sowed thickly and at the right time, all the careful thinning, all in order that the strongest plant would be left. And now a second hoeing to be sure that nothing hindered this one plant. If life were as simple as beet growing, everything would be easy, Hannah thought. The weak would be hoed out, the strongest would be left to grow to their destiny. But no, the strong were left to worry and fret, to work their futile lives away. This is just a picture of a family of beet workers and children in Fort Collins. To better understand what Hope Sykes wrote about, I'd like to share actual local photographs of the sugar beet world. This is a view from 1915 of Buckingham Place, the jungle, where the beet workers lived in Fort Collins. It's possible that the area was called that name because of the Upton Sinclair book of the same name from 1906 about the inhumane conditions of the meat packing industry. Second Hoeing is also compared to John Steinbeck's expose on the plight of field workers in California, The Grapes of Wrath. This is another shot of the poor living conditions of the beet field workers in Fort Collins from 1915. This photograph shows a typical beet worker shack where a family would live in just 1 or 2 rooms in very poor conditions. This photograph shows a little boy and girl in typical Russian-German clothing in front of a wooden building. The growing of beets had 4 stages: planting, blocking, thinning or second hoeing, and harvesting. This photograph from the 1920s shows a woman in dress and neckerchief, along with a girl in overalls in the beet fields. The mother is blocking while the child is thinning the beets. Children began to work in the fields at a very young age, and it was not uncommon for babies and younger children to stay in the fields while the rest of the family performed the back-breaking work. Here are German-Russian children pulled out of school to pull up the sugar beets. Working in the beet fields could be dangerous work, as shown in this photo from 1915. This young boy is cutting the tops off of the beets in a field near Fort Collins. The family, father, mother, and 2 boys, 9 and 12 years old, were expected to make $700 in about 2 months' time. The work began at 6 a.m. and continued to 6 p.m. with 1 hour off for lunch. This image shows a team of 3 horses pulling a puller in a field of sugar beets. 2 horses were sufficient unless it was a very dry season. 2 men are in a field loading sugar beets onto 2 horse-drawn wagons using forks or shovels. This is a photograph of a wagon drawn by a team of 4 horses loaded with beets. Written on the back of the original photograph, it says harvesting sugar beets circa 1921. Numbers were assigned to farmers to expedite the weighing of beets at the beet dump. Then the dirt and green tops were deducted from the weight. Full wagons weighed about 4 tons. This photograph from around 1910 shows men and children with horse-drawn wagons loaded with sugar beets at the Fort Collins Railway Station. The Fort Collins Depot and railroad cars of the Colorado and Southern Railroad can be seen in the background. Colorado once had more than 20 sugar beet factories, supporting tens of thousands of farmers, field hands, and factory workers from the early to the mid-1900s. In 1902, a group of Fort Collins men, including Benjamin Hoddle, chartered the Fort Collins Sugar Manufacturing Company. Much of the town's prosperity revolved around beets and feeding lambs for the next 40 years. The company was purchased in 1904 by the Great Western Sugar Company, who operated the factory located on the site of the current City of Fort Collins Streets Department. Waste effluent from the process was deposited in successive nearby settling ponds, but eventually the company ran out of property under their ownership on the north side of the Poudre River. In 1926, a Great Western engineer designed a suspension bridge that supported a metal flume to carry slurry of mostly lime, beet pulp, and water across the river to be deposited on company land. The flume was operational until the mid-1960s when the plant closed. The historic Great Western Sugar Company flume and bridge are still visible from the Poudre Trail, south side of the river, midway between LeMay Avenue and Timberline Road. The National Park Service listed the Great Western Sugar Company effluent flume and bridge in the National Register of Historic Places. The structure spans the Cache-la-Poudre River at Kingfisher Point Nature Area. One of the foundations of the German-Russian community was the church. Most of those Germans from Russia included Catholics, Lutherans, and Mennonites. The German Congregational Church at the corner of WHEDBEE and Oak was founded and built by German-Russian immigrants to the area. Bethlehem Lutheran Church was organized on March 20, 1904, but church records date back to 1902, the first year of large-scale German-Russian immigration to the Fort Collins area. The congregation's first building was a small outbuilding donated by the Fort Collins, Colorado Sugar Company and moved to the 500 block of 10th Street in an area of town called Andersonville. A new building was constructed of limestone at the corner of WHEDBEE and Olive. It was dedicated in 1914. The minister of the church, Reverend Conrad Becker, was a close friend and admirer of Hope Sykes and helped her with her research. Why Mrs. Sykes wrote that book was wholly philanthropic. She wanted to help them, to have them better known and more fully understood by our home people. One young man in the church said the controversy over the book nearly tore the church in two. Immanuel Christian Reformed Church had its beginning in the German Evangelical Congregational Church, which began raising money for a church building in 1903. There were conflicts within the congregation, and in 1912, 30 German-Russian families left the German Congregational Church to form the Evangelical Congregational Immanuel Church. Work on St. Joseph Catholic Church began in 1900, and the church was dedicated in August 1901. It appears that most of the Germans from Russia who settled in Fort Collins were Volga Protestants, but there were families who attended St. Joseph. In 1932, Hope founded a local writing club called the Pen Pointers. The members, mostly women, wrote articles, short stories, and poems. Their fellow members critiqued the writings and gave pointers on how to improve individual writing skills. This image is a program from 1982 when the club celebrated their 50th anniversary. Local historian Charlene Tresner spoke on their famous member and founder, Hope Williams Sykes. Hope Sykes' second book, JOPPA, was published in 1937. In this story, Katerina, a young German farm girl who lives in poverty, moves to Palestine with her family at age 17. In Palestine, she helps capture an Arab thief and marries a German-Russian, Adolf Hunsaker. Hunsaker is persuaded by a Mormon missionary to move his wife and 3 children to Utah, a place she hates. Eventually, she grows to love her life in this new country with her husband and now 9 children. Described in a review as a curiously beautiful novel, the book is based on the true life story of an 82-year-old grandmother who shared the story of her life in Germany, Palestine, and Utah. When Hope read her manuscript of JOPPA out loud to the elderly lady, she nodded and said, "It is my life." After the reaction from the German-Russian community about second hoeing, Howard and Hope Sykes moved for a short time into town in Fort Collins and then to California, where they later divorced. Hope returned to visit friends in Fort Collins only a few times, the first after her divorce and the second when publishers had rejected a lengthy philosophical book. Her friends described her as discouraged, despondent, and nearly penniless. She passed away in 1973 and was buried at Woodlawn Cemetery in Santa Monica, California. Though discouraged from the response to second hoeing, Hope Sykes brought awareness and understanding about the German Russians who lived and worked in harsh conditions in the beet fields and factories in northern Colorado. Second hoeing became a valuable historical record of Germans from Russia in America. In the New York Times, May 12, 1935, Louis Gannett wrote, "This year, if the contract between the Agricultural Adjustment Administration and the beet growers is enforced, there will be no children less than 14 years of age working in the beet fields of this country. It may be that Hope Williams Sykes, when she was writing Second Hoeing, which is a first novel, was not consciously inspired by a desire to write a propagandistic book about this phase of child labor in America. The fact remains that second hoeing takes on the stature of a powerful proletarian drama of the American soil, with children the main protagonists upon whom the bitter impact of economic struggle is spent."